we were working on chapter 14 of the book of Mark. Mark is about the servant Savior, and we're in a section that was called the servant prepares, and we are seeing as he's making his way, Jesus knew the cross was coming, and there were things he needed to accomplish on the way, and that's what we were looking at. If you have that last week's handout and you didn't get to fill it in, I'm going to give you the front side right now. The front side is the side that at the top says chapter 14, part 2, page 2. And here come the blanks. I'm not going to reteach it, so I'm just going to give you the blanks. Betrayal and arrest. Betrayal and arrest. I just realized today that I did not post last week's teaching on my YouTube page. I will be doing that this afternoon. And so if you just text me, other than Gina, everyone in the room has my number. Everybody, if you need me to, and Linda, text me and say, send me the link for last week and I'll send it to you. Then you get right to that week instead of having to find it in the list of lessons. Okay, betrayal and arrest. And here we see that Jesus rebuked Peter for taking a sword because here's 4 reasons. He used the wrong weapon. It's a spiritual battle. We can't use earthly weapons in spiritual warfare. At the wrong time, there may be a day when we'll have to defend, and Peter would have to defend, but this wasn't it. For the wrong purpose, it wasn't God's plan, and with the wrong motive. We must remember this. We must fight God's way in God's time for God's glory. And then at the bottom of the page, because Jesus was forsaken, we never are. Because Jesus was forsaken, we never are. So now turn the paper over. This is new. And we're going to begin reading. We're going to read this long section with this title on this paragraph, The Trials, plural. You may think Jesus only had one trial. He did not. He had multiple trials. And they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. And Peter had followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. Because remember, they really didn't have any reason that Jesus deserved death. If he had deserved death, he would not be able to pay for our deserving of death. So he was undeserving of death, and that's what they were looking for, a reason. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands. Yet even about this their testimony did not agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But he remained silent and made no answer. Again the high priest asked him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And the high priest tore his garments and said, What further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on the ground and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, Prophesy. And the guards received him with blows. Okay, we're in the midst of the trials here. Both the Jewish trial and the Roman trial, there was 2 trials. The Jews could find him guilty of blasphemy, which is what they wanted to do, and that was worthy of death. But the Roman was the government, and the Jewish leadership did not have the authority legally to put Jesus to death. So that's why they were looking for Pilate and Herod to try to get them to condemn Jesus so they could do what they wanted to him, which was to crucify him. First he was before Annas, the former high priest. Then he was before the full council to hear witnesses. And in the early morning, they had a final vote of condemnation. This is put together through all the Gospels. We didn't just read all that, but it's in the 4 Gospels together. In the Roman trial, before Pilate, who said, "There's no reason, I find no fault with him." And then he went to Herod. Pilate had the idea, oh, Herod is in town. Let's let him go to Herod. Herod was a leader above Pilate, and he thought, then I won't have to be the one who makes this decision. Let Herod do it. Because he knew that freeing Jesus or saying Jesus was not guilty was going to turn the Jewish community against him. Because the Jewish leaders wanted him condemned. But legally, Pilate couldn't find a reason, so he sent him to Herod. Herod asked for a sign. Do a sign to prove who you are. And Jesus wouldn't do that. He was silent before him. And so Herod sent him back to Pilate without a decision. So now Pilate was stuck. And it comes back to Pilate where he offered him a thief instead. We'll see that next section. And they gave in to the crowd. That's just a summary of the trials. It was a busy day for Jesus. The Jewish leaders were desperate to get him crucified, but they found no witnesses, so they coerced or hired false witnesses, but they wouldn't even agree on what Jesus said. So they just asked him straight out, "Are you the Christ?" And he said he was, and they said, "That's blasphemy." Well, it's only blasphemy if it's not true. Jesus is the Christ. He was the Christ. He is the Christ. And so saying I am was not blasphemy. It would be blasphemy for me or you to say that because we are not Christ. But he was. And they found him guilty of blasphemy because they would not believe that he was the Christ. What's sad as we studied Revelation is that the Jewish people will accept the Antichrist as Messiah. They rejected the true Christ, but they will, in the last days, accept the Antichrist as their Messiah. Tragic. The Jewish leaders said his words condemned him, but in fact, his words condemned them. They knew he was the Christ, but still rejected him and had him crucified. Everything he was doing proved he was the Christ. He was fulfilling prophecy, and if they were following what they knew, what they called the word that they believed, that they said they lived by, they would have had to accept him as the Christ, but they rejected him. So his words, I am the Christ, that they rejected actually condemned them, not him. Do you ever ask yourself, how could Jesus, God's Son, endure their lies and mistreatment? Jesus could submit to the abuse of men because he had already submitted to the will of God. He was already submitted. He had already prayed, not my will, but yours be done. And so he was able to go through this because he had already submitted himself to God's will. And he trusted God's will. When we are submitted, when we are fully submitted to God's will, we can accept whatever happens to us. If you wonder sometimes when you see either longtime believers or others, and you think, I don't know how they're enduring this. I don't know how they're just accepting that this is what they're going through with such a good attitude and such a good response. It's because they've already submitted themselves to God. And so whatever comes their way, we are able to say, not my will, but yours be done. The issue is often that we're not fully submitted to God's will. That's where it comes down to. It's full surrender, full submission.